These are my disclosures. So, I mean, we're all very well aware that sugars still prevails as a dominant public health concern. Carbohydrates in general, we're still seeing a heavy push for low carbohydrate diets and this interest in carnivore diets, despite the fact that there is a lot of evidence that it does really depend on the food. This is a recent Instagram post from the WHO, which is saying that sugar has no nutritional value, which I think Jenny helped us to see earlier, that it has we have large brains with big metabolic needs that use glucose. So this is an interesting post. And I think it reinforces the need for us, as Karen said, to really help with trying to shift this public messaging that's really just dampening anybody's thought of consuming sugar in any form. And so this extends also to fruit, which, again, we do come from a frugivory background. So this is something that we also have to help with addressing the role of, because even when it comes to our guidelines, there's been that shift from what we originally called fruits and vegetables to now vegetables and fruit. So we're really downplaying the role of fruit in the diet and the nutrition that it can bring. And a lot of that stems from the biochemical pathway of fructose, where fructose has really been thrown under the bus because it's an unregulated substrate that contributes to de novo lipogenesis and the production of uric acid. However, this is an extremely simplistic view. We've seen both in Walters yesterday, where we're showing that fructose equivalents don't show any harm. And what Karen showed us, that this is really just a small piece of the puzzle in the way in which we consume food and its overall metabolic effect on health. So if we look at our clinical practice guidelines, these are the ones for diabetes. They are recommending for us to be minimizing our intake of free and added sugars between 5 to 10%. And then in our major dietary guidelines, this is also something that is consistent with really helping to keep it below 5% of energy or 10%, depending. And this is something they are still promoting in the public. But as Karen showed us, most of this evidence for harm is really coming from sugar-sweetened beverages. So why something that is very focused on sugar-sweetened beverages is then broadly being applied to all sugars is something that we have some work to do on. So the evidence is very clear when it comes to sugar-sweetened beverages, and Karen's opened up our eyes into the evidence on the other food sources of sugars. I'm going to take 2 seconds just to highlight a couple of the series that was done at U of T, led by John, just to help reinforce that message and the volume of work that really goes behind this. So this is the series of systematic reviews and meta-analyses that were done across all cardiometabolic risk factors. So these are of pooling together all the evidence of randomized controlled trials, and was the work of a lot of wonderful and very talented graduate students. I'm summarizing it here just in a table, and again, like Karen said, the importance of teasing apart the evidence to look at it by energy source is important. We're really looking at the role of a comparator. So if you're thinking about a study where the prescription was to consume a sugar-sweetened food in one group, then what was the control group given? Was it an equal caloric value, or was it given as a prescription to consume this food and the control group carried on the way they normally did, where those are very different messages, where you could end up with results that are driven by something being given as a source of excess calories. Then we also have subtraction trials, where you have a group that's for example, people that consume sugar-sweetened beverages, and the advice is to displace the sugar-sweetened beverage with, let's say, a non-caloric food or beverage, like a diet pop or water. And then ad libitum is where advice is given just generally without any guidance on whether or not there should be substitution or not. So this table here represents all of the meta-analyses across the various cardiometabolic risk factors, from body weight down to inflammation. Red here is where we are summarizing the evidence for where there's harm, and again, very consistently, sugar-sweetened beverage signal is strong, and there, predominantly in the addition studies, again, where it's being consumed as a source of excess calories, but you see it a little bit in the substitution. And a lot of the studies have the sugar-sweetened beverages with another form, so you see that signal is much more prevalent across all of the risk factors. Then when it comes to the other types of food sources, some show no effect, but some actually show benefit. So fruit, whether it's being prescribed as something in an equicaloric setting, or even being advised to be consumed on top of the diet, maybe there is some natural displacement that's going on because this is what's being prescribed, not actual. And then we also see some benefit for 100% fruit juice, as well as a few other food sources like honey, dried fruit, sweetened soy milk, and some dark chocolate. We also did the series on prospective cohort studies across incident cardiometabolic diseases. And here we have a heat map to present that. And in this case, we've got all the cardiometabolic risk factors across, outcomes across the top, and then all the food sources for each of the rows. And where you see red, that's the signal for harm, where the intensity of the red is a higher magnitude of effect, whereas the green is showing you where we're seeing benefit. So again, even in these cohort studies, we're seeing that consistent signal for sugar-sweetened beverages, as well as fruit drinks, which is important to differentiate from 100% fruit juice. And then you are seeing benefit for fruit juice in some of the outcomes, as well as fruit consistently across all. You're seeing some benefit for whole grain breakfast cereals, yogurt, ice cream, as well as chocolate. So there is a role for some food sources of sugars. Where you see there's an amount in brackets, that's where there was a dose that is where you're seeing benefit. So that, as Karen was saying, and I'll show in the next slide, the dose is also important to consider, because again, when something's being consumed as at a higher dose, it's a source of excess calories, which can then have very different effects versus if it's being consumed in moderation. So this is just a two cohorts analyses that I'll show you, so you can see that there is a distinct difference between sugar-sweetened beverages and 100% fruit juice. In this case, we're looking at metabolic syndrome, where you're seeing a linear effect for SSBs, but you're seeing that more U-shaped curve when it comes to 100% fruit juice, where there is benefit that's coming at about half a cup or 125 ml. And then there's something similar here that we're seeing with the incidence of hypertension. So the overall summary of the evidence, as Karen has put together nicely, is the importance of really understanding the energy control or the comparator, as well as the dose, and then the food source, where as a source of excess energy, predominantly in the form of sugar-sweetened beverages and some other sugary drinks, we're seeing increases in cardiometabolic outcomes, as well as risk factors. And then other food sources of sugars are showing either no effect or some benefit, such as the fruit 100% fruit juice, the whole grain breakfast cereals, sweetened yogurts and chocolate, dried fruit and honey, dark chocolate, and sweetened soy beverages. And always important to understand the certainty of the evidence that we're presenting. So grade is done across all of these meta-analyses. And when it comes to the randomized control trials, I didn't want to add another line to this slide, but the evidence was moderate, giving us a moderate certainty of evidence. And for the cohorts, it's more low, where some of them is moderate when it comes to the where you see a dose response. So the evidence is quite good. So now thinking about how we now translate this into the real world and what happens in public messaging and changes in policies, the focus on nutrients, specifically sugars, in the examples I'll be giving here, can have unintended consequences. In the case where it has the intended consequence, if you think about a sugar sweetened reduction strategy to help with reducing sugar sweetened beverages, replacing the sugars in this liquid form using a sweetener, for example, will have the intended consequence of removing that as a source of excess calories in the diet. So it can work in the context of a liquid form. However, if we try to look at foods which require volume and bulk, and when you're substituting sugar for an artificial sweetener, for example, it's not the same amount. You're talking about grams, which then go into milligrams, so you have to have something put into the product to be able to produce the food. So if you think of something like Frosted Flakes, and then there's the reduced sugar version, you are seeing that there is no difference in the calories per serving. The sugars have come down a little bit in this reduced sugar version, and unfortunately, because it's being substituted a lot of time with starch, the glycemic index goes up. I don't think I need to talk about the glycemic index anymore than what's already been discussed thus far in terms of its benefit, but we are seeing that a lot of the sugar sweeten reduction strategies, like reducing the sugar in foods, are going to have the result of a product that could potentially be higher in glycemic index. And then if we remove the frosting completely and think about cornflakes, again, we're talking about something that has the same caloric value. Yes, it's lower in sugar, but now the glycemic index is, if not higher. If we now compare our low sugar cornflakes with another cereal like All Bran Buds, which contains psyllium, and we compare the servings here, the sugar's content is low in the cornflakes, but it's higher in the All Bran Buds. So this is something where if we're only going to be selecting a food based on the sugar content, and we're going to give this a warning label because it's high in sugar, then a consumer may not select the All Bran Buds, they would select the cornflakes. However, it's lower in calories per serving. It has a whopping 13 grams of fiber, and we've been already very well informed of the benefits of fiber in the diet and how we actually are not the greatest at getting enough fiber in our diets. And you're talking about a product that has a low glycemic index. And take it a step further, because it has the psyllium in it, it also has evidence and a health claim to reduce cholesterol. So focusing solely on sugar is not necessarily the best approach to selecting our foods. And taking it outside of the context of cereals to even looking at something like milk, if we compare a cow's milk, 2% cow's milk, to sweetened soy milk, which is actually sweetened with less sugar, 12 grams of total sugar, mostly coming from lactose in the milk, versus your soy beverage, where it's added sugars to match the sweetness, it's only 5 grams, but it's considered added sugars. So again, this is something that might flag as a product somebody might not want to be consuming if they're being very sugar focused. However, there is a slightly lower caloric value per serving. But importantly, soy, again, has a health claim for lowering cholesterol. So looking at the overall food product is important. Just the last example here when we're talking about kind of front of pack labeling and information. The one difference that at least I'm aware of thus far in labeling is the warning labels in Mexico, which include calories, which is different than definitely in Canada, where we're only focusing on the amounts of sodium, sugars, and saturated fat, which ignores what's happening when anybody's doing any types of substitutions in reformulations. So here we're including calories. So if you're going to replace that sugar with a sweetener and then maybe some starch or something else, if it's still flagging as a source of excess calories, it would not get it away from getting that warning label. So what's done in Mexico when they do their reformulation of Fruit Loops, which is now its low sugar version, see, there's the sugar, it's gone, there's no more added sugar, but instead, and you're getting the lower calories, and that's because the replacement instead of starch is added soluble fiber, as well as allulose, which Tosif is going to get us into rare sugars coming up soon. So when it's including sugars, when it's including calories in the warning label, then it's helping to result in reformulation of products that aren't just focused on throwing in refined starch to get off the warning label for the sugars, but resulting in a higher GI product. So I'm sure if we tested this low sugar Fruit Loops, we'd see something maybe a little better than the counterpart of cornflakes. So thinking about this in the terms of a global context, if we look at the global burden of disease study, we've just pulled out North America as well as Europe to see what are the top 10 leading risk factors for disability-adjusted life years. And the two dietary ones that stand out is low intake of whole grains and low intake of fruit. Interesting that. And then if you look at the top dietary risk factors, again, that low fruit and that low whole grains really is right at the top. But we're also seeing low fiber and low milk being higher up on the list of risk factors that are leading to disability-adjusted life years, and high sugar-sweetened beverages is there at the bottom. So the conclusion that they state here is that we'd probably have a bigger impact if we focused on promoting the uptake of fruit and whole grains and not so much focus on sugar. So again, if we're talking about what we might want to be focusing in terms of reducing, we want to be reducing the sugar-sweetened beverages as our target, but we should also be at the same time focusing on ways to increase our intake of whole grains, fruit, and fiber-containing foods. So just a high-level summary, again, we really need to be thinking about energy control as well as dose and food source when we're talking about sugars. And maybe we shouldn't really be talking about sugars anymore, so that we are focusing more on helping people with food. And so when it comes to policies and guidelines, helping with communicating that is really important when it comes to cardiometabolic disease risk reduction. So still focusing on the importance of where sugars is consumed as a source of excess calories is important, but that may only work in certain instances, like when we're talking about a beverage, like a sugar-sweetened beverage. But when it comes to things like our cereals and reformulations, we shouldn't be talking about sugars alone. We need to be considering it in the context of what it's being replaced. So still thinking about substitution where we can be displacing calories, like for sugar-sweetened beverages is important, but we also should really be focusing, again, like I'm saying, on the importance of the role of sugars in the diet, and where if it's going to be substituted, we have to be thinking about calories and the glycemic index and the overall health of that food, and that there is a role for sugars in some nutrient-dense foods, because it can be a vehicle to help us to get in a lot of good other nutrients. If you looked at the dose response curves in Karen's beautiful recent paper, added sugars has a U-shaped curve where at about 45 to 50 grams per day, which is 10% of energy, that's where you're seeing the lowest risk. So it can even, added sugars, play a role in, depending on the population and the overall diet, it can play a role in helping to bring in other nutrients into the diet. So thank you for your attention, and I must acknowledge the many, many people who have contributed to all of the meta-analyses that help to us to get to the point of being able to really understand the role of sugars in the diet. Thank you.